Welcome to the My Favorite CPA podcast. I'm CPA Dan Hodges, your host, and today we are talking about employing employees and specifically employing your family members. What are things to think about? And let's just kind of back this whole chuck up for 1 second. There are a lot of things to think about when you are employing a family member, and it starts with some things that aren't so obvious. The first thing that we may want to think about when we're in business and we're employing a family member is what structure are we using and how is this business taxed? Because you could be in business, and I talk about this a great deal in my training course. You could be in business as an LLC or an unincorporated business, filing a sole proprietorship tax form or a partnership form. You could also be in business being taxed as a corporation, and a corporation could be taxed as an S corporation where the profits flow through and show up on the owner's tax return, or the business could also be taxed like a corporation where it is a C corporation. C corporations file their own tax return, report their own income, their own expense, and do something that the other business structures don't do, which is report and pay their own tax payments from the company account direct to the government. Those are different ways that a business can be organized. So that's an important thing to think about. So having covered the first steps about how am I taxed, you have to understand that because when you are taxed probably as an LLC or an unincorporated venture, either a sole proprietor or a partnership, there can be certain tax benefits if your employees are, for example, your children. Now, let's just talk about employing your children for a second. I do hear about this sometimes on TikToks or YouTube shorts. Finance bros come on and they talk about how they just pay a whole chunk of money to their child and then the money just disappears off their tax return. No taxes, nothing to worry about. That is a half-truth. Potentially, you could hire a family member. Potentially, you could hire a minor child. And potentially, if you were structured as an LLC or unincorporated sole proprietorship or partnership, potentially, you could pay that employee, that minor child, for productive work. But the question that might come up is a couple things. First of all, what's the appropriate amount to pay that child? And what are the tax benefits that you're expecting? If we're just talking about paying your child minimum wage and they're doing minimum work and minimum contributions, there's probably not going to be a real big tax benefit. Maybe that's just about employing your children because you don't want them to work for somebody else. Maybe that's about employing your children because you want to teach them work ethic and habits, get them some exposure to what it would be like working in the family business. Those are non-tax reasons, perhaps, to employ a family member. Now, let's switch to something very related, but let's just take this slightly different angle. Let's say that you are able to justify hiring your minor child from one of those business structures, an unincorporated business, an LLC operating as a taxed as a sole proprietorship, or a partnership. If you did that, the tax treatment, and if you paid your child a large amount that's justifiable, we're not talking for emptying waste baskets and that kind of stuff around the office. What we're talking about is obtaining a market comparative quote. Let's just say, okay, here's something I always say. Every kid nowadays comes out of the womb and they can use an iPod, an iPhone, an iPad, an iTop. They can do iMovies. They can do the most amazing stuff I've ever seen, whether it's designing websites or doing videos. Kids nowadays just They intuitively know this stuff. And old guys like me, we're struggling like, what? How do we plug this in and make this work? I joke a little bit. I know more than I let on. But since kids know this, let's say you're in business and you have a successful company and you want to do a marketing campaign. And let's say you get a comparative quote from a company downtown, and it's going to be a lot of money. I'm talking $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for this marketing campaign. And some of that marketing campaign, let's say, is photography or video or website building or whatever it is that's kind of intangible. It's going to take some effort. Maybe you could use technology to do it. Maybe there's a lot of ways to do it. But let's just say maybe your kid is particularly suited because they came out, out of the womb with an iPod, iPhone, iTop, an iPad, and they can use iMovie. Well, you're in luck because you obtained that market comparative quote and it's $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and you think to yourself, I'm a smart businessman. I'm a successful business person. And I want to teach my kids some work ethic and some business skills. So maybe I can employ them to do those services. And maybe their work will be just as good as the marketing agency or nearly as good. Sometimes good is good enough. Sometimes work doesn't have to be great when it comes to the creative realm. And honestly, with some of this technology, all the Apple stuff, I mean, you truly can make stuff look great if you're born with that in your genetics. So if you could pay that $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of wages or payments instead of to a marketing agency, if you could pay it to your own crew, your kids. If you have a couple kids that, they're all smart with that and they all work together and they have, creative juices flowing and they have the creativity. This might be the time to pay them. And if you've established that market value as $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, why couldn't you pay your kid? If they're doing the work and they can produce the results, they may be worth that money. So now what we can do is take $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of expenses, reducing your profit in your business that otherwise might be subjected to federal, state, and FICA tax. We can offload that to the kid's tax return. Let's just say you have 2, 3, 4 kids. I don't know how many. If you pay each kid $10,000 for their part, thinking about today's tax filing, and I'd almost want to show you a 1040, but if you're familiar with the standard deduction, years ago it was a couple $1,000s. Under Donald Trump's tax plan, the standard deduction for every American became in the realm of $12,000. So what am I telling you? What I'm telling you is if you can pay each of your kids, if you can justify under the criteria I just gave you, and if you can paper why you did what you did, that's the secret sauce, don't forget it. If you can paper why you did what you did, and you pay each kid $12,000 for their creative effort, once they subtract their standard deduction, well, guess what? There's no federal tax because they have zero federal taxable income. $12,000 on a W-2 minus $12,000 roughly, approximately, standard deduction for each American, including everybody, zero taxable income, zero federal tax. So if you're following what I'm saying here, we have a business where we are taking $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 off of the business tax return. And now it's moving to the kids who each are paying zero tax. So if you're making that kind of money, you could find yourself quickly in the paying an effective rate between federal and state of 35, 40%. We're taking it from 35, 40% to zero federal tax. That's amazing in and of itself. So now, if you are structured as one of those structures we were talking about before, the sole proprietorship taxation or the partnership taxation, there is more benefits for you. And here's what it is. Sole proprietors can benefit from hiring family members when they employ their children. Children, minors, are exempt from Social Security and FICA tax. Did you hear what I said? So you're going to pay them on a W-2, They're going to report that income on their own tax return at a lower tax rate than you as a business owner might have. And the huge, I mean, that's a huge benefit in and of itself. But the even bigger benefit here is if that profit was left on your business tax return, it would have been subjected to self-employment tax in this tax structure. When you can use this this tax benefit here, that minor children working for mom and dad's business don't have to pay FICA tax, it's huge. We save a huge amount of money. So, like I say, and like I started the conversation with, this doesn't work out great if you're paying your kids minimum wage for emptying waste baskets and that kind of stuff. It just doesn't really move the bar. But if you have several kids, or if the work they're doing, if you can justify through market alternatives high dollar amounts, and if you are filing the sole proprietorship tax form or the partnership tax form, now we just moved a huge chunk to lower tax land. It's an amazing, amazing thing. Does this work for other family members? No. No, it works for minor kids, and that's about it. If you employ your spouse is going to be subjected to FICA tax. So either it's FICA tax as self-employment tax on the profit of the business under one of these tax structures, or if you pay them wages, it's kind of moving lines on the tax return. The money that would have been included in profit on the self-employment tax line is moving up to the W-2 line, and your spouse is paying FICA tax, and you're paying employer matching FICA tax on those wages. So that we're really not accomplishing too much with paying the spouse. Now, there are some legitimate reasons to pay your spouse. A, maybe they deserve it for the work that they're doing. B, sometimes there can be some health plans and health benefits that can be obtained under spouse employees that might not be available to the owner. So that's a non-tax reason for doing some of these things. How about hiring mom and dad? I really don't think so, but it depends. Every tax situation is different, and that's why it's important to have a tax professional who knows the family dynamics, who's looking at the overall situation. I mean, if mom's in a low tax bracket and the kid's in a huge tax bracket, I mean, economics might be there to employ family members, mom, dad. Even if there's no FICA savings, there would definitely be federal and state tax savings. Will this strategy work if you are filing a different tax form, like an S corporation tax form or a C corporation tax form? Well, yes and no. This is the way tax law is. There's a lot of mental gymnastics here. Number one, for minor children, there is no exemption from the FICA tax for minor children. So when we pay those wages, there's no sidestepping FICA tax. It might be sidestepped as a result of your tax structure, but not by virtue of paying your minor children. Would there be tax benefits on the income tax side? Probably yes, if it's something like we were talking about earlier, where mom and dad are in the 35-40% tax bracket range and the kids are in a near zero tax bracket range. So if you involve the kids in the business and you pay them their worth, there's probably tax benefits, and what they are entirely depends on your structure. I want to see if I can bring this up here. So let's look at how IRS views things like this. Here's what the IRS has to say in their newsroom. They do talk about different ways that husband and wife can do business together. Now, they talk about here how when one spouse is employed by another, the wages of an individual who works for their spouse are still subject to federal income tax, Social Security, and Medicare tax. That's the FICA tax. But, hey, they're exempted from FICA. From FUTA, federal unemployment. So you would save realm of $56 per spousal employee. So that's not a big savings that we're talking about there. But parents employing their children in the correct structure, yes, they can be exempted from FICA tax. Social Security, Medicare, and FUTA tax. All we have to worry about is the income tax, which presumptively would be lower for the kids. It could be very similar for a partnership, but it would be, as I said earlier, different for a business that files a corporate return. So there are tax reasons and non-tax reasons to employ family. As I started out this conversation, if we're saving FICA tax, and if the kids have the skills and the resources, and if we're saving income tax, man, that can be huge. Very worthwhile considering. Other things to think about, if you are going to hire a family member, whether it's mom or dad, spouse, children, that kind of stuff, remember that family members should be bona fide employees. So we're going into non-tax issues here. They should be performing appropriate work. They should receive reasonable compensation for what they do. You don't want to hire unqualified people, even if it's a family member, because that can be a recipe for disaster. You also don't want to overpay family members. Just think about the environment that creates. It might create expectations on the part of the family members, or expectations from you to them, which, as my younger brother said, who worked for my dad in the family business, sometimes I can't figure out, am I doing what I'm doing in my capacity as employee, or am I doing what I'm doing in my capacity as son? I don't know. So that's how the dynamic can be affected. Also, if you think about, if you have other employees in your operations, when you hire a family member and employees see that, especially if they have visibility into the roles and responsibilities or visibility into the compensation, they may look at that and like, this is nepotism. This is weird. Family members get special treatment. I wish I was part of the family. So it could damage employee morale when you're hiring family members. So definitely think about that. These are non-tax considerations, right? Just think about the potential stress of that overall situation. And then if you are going to go down this lane, definitely, as much as you can, make sure that you're doing things right. The secret sauce always in all things is papering it with the correct underlying documentation. Have that potential employee, fill out a job application, interview them, keep thorough records, make them keep a report of the work that they did in their roles, in their day-to-day, like a timesheet. What did you do today? Have them keep that timesheet. Also, whether they participate in it and whether you create it, create a job description, their roles, responsibilities, and expectation. Make sure that all payroll tax filings are filed. So if you're going to hire anybody, employee, family member, or non-family member, make sure it's done right by involving your accountant, your CPA firm, your enrolled agent. If you do have an employee, taxes have to be withheld. So when it comes to payroll and payroll taxes, there are federal returns that are due quarterly. One of the forms you have to file is called the 941 Employer's Tax Return. That is due 4 times a year. It's due April 30th, July 31st, October 31st, and January 31st. In addition, there's W-2s and W-3s. Those are due January 31st. There's no extensions for any of these. All the payroll taxes must be paid to the government and on the appropriate timetable and schedule. There's also state taxes. The state taxes are going to mirror the same deadlines. Often state taxes are due more frequently. They're probably due monthly, as would the federal tax payment for these employees. Payroll is not ridiculously complicated. Payroll is not an area where there's 5,000 rules. Payroll is, in some ways, kind of straightforward, but the rules are firm. The rules are the rules, and you want to make sure that you meet all the rules. You want to make sure that you apply for the employer payroll tax accounts. You want to make sure that you are figuring out payroll correctly. You want to make sure that you meet the minimum wage and hours laws. You want to make sure you comply with the Department of Labor rules. You want to make sure that you comply with all the federal and state payroll tax rules. You want to make sure that you pay unemployment both to the state and to the federal government. So for these reasons, I do recommend that you talk with your accountant and that you consider utilizing a payroll service. Probably, if you have an accountant, I think it makes sense if that is spearheaded by your accountant, or at least they're involved in the decision of what you do. I don't advocate using Basement Bob's payroll service or Cheap Charlie's payroll service. Just because you say you do payroll doesn't mean that you're qualified. So I recommend using a qualified service so that things are done right. Because if you have a contractor doing this work and it's done wrong, do you know who's on the hook for that? You as the business owner. The business is on the hook for doing things wrong. Then other things you want to think about would also include things like doing performance reviews with that employee. Here's your roles and responsibilities. Here's what you're supposed to be doing. You're doing a good job on this stuff, and this other stuff needs improvement. Involve your attorney in the discussion too. They might recommend certain things, which might include maybe some company policies and familiarizing your employees with those. It's not a simple one-word answer to should I hire a family member? Should I hire my kids? Yes, there can be tax benefits if your structure is correct and if your fact pattern is correct. Dotting the I's and crossing the T's, that is going to be what you want to do in this circumstance and in all circumstances. So that's a little bit about what I had to say about hiring employees, family members as employees, whether it's mom, dad, brother, sister, son, daughter, cousin, nephew, whatever. Just do it right. And if you like this content here today, do me a favor. Drop a comment if there's anything you'd like to talk more about. Hit the like button and or subscribe and follow. We're definitely bumping up against some new milestones with our followers and likes on a number of different platforms. So if you hit that like, follow, share button, and drop a comment. For some reason, that seems to help our numbers. So if you would just drop a comment with your question, be happy to get back to you, and I'd appreciate your like, share, and follow.